Marcus Sawyer, a 43-year-old American wildlife photographer, had spent 9 weeks alone in the remote wilderness of the Brooks Range in northern Alaska, 18 months after losing his 7-year-old daughter Emma in a drowning accident at their cabin lake. He had abandoned his life in Anchorage and retreated to these vast, empty spaces where the silence felt less judgmental than the pitying looks of friends who did not know what to say to a father who had turned his back for 30 seconds. While she played at the dock, he knew these frozen valleys better than most, having documented wolves and caribou here for over a decade, surviving in temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in hours. On this November afternoon, he had parked his snow machine on a ridge at 3,000 feet above a valley, where he had been tracking a wolf pack for 2 weeks. The light was that impossible Arctic blue that happens just before sunset, when the world seems suspended between day and night. He had stayed later than usual, trying to capture the way the snow caught the fading light, trying not to think about how Emma used to call this time of day the magic hour. 3 hours later, in full darkness, when he returned to his machine, fumbling with frozen fingers to start the engine, he heard something faint, almost lost in the wind, a sound that made his heart stop, because he knew that sound from years in these mountains, the cry of a wolf pup in distress. He clicked on his headlamp and scanned the surrounding snow, and there, not 10 feet from his machine, was a grey wolf pup, no more than 5 months old, collapsing in the snow. His silver and black coat was matted with ice and dried blood. His right front paw held up at an Eatly Blig, his right front paw held up at an Alden Fave, Leven Savriv Five, awkward angle, the pads torn and bleeding from running on frozen ground without the protective snow cover. His small sides heaved with exhaustion, his breath coming in desperate pants, creating small clouds in the frigid air. But what froze Marcus in place was not the injuries or the impossibility of a lone pup this far from any den. It was the way the pup looked at him, with eyes that held not fear, but something that looked terrifyingly like hope, like expectation, like he had been searching for Marcus specifically and had finally found him. If you believe that the wildest places hold the deepest truths, please subscribe to Wandering Heart's Tales. Every subscription helps us share stories of impossible connections that remind us we are never truly alone in this world. Your support brings these moments of grace to others who need to remember that sometimes the broken find each other for a reason. Marcus, with nearly 15 years of experience tracking wolves in Alaska, knew that wolf pups never approached humans. They were taught from birth that humans meant danger, death, the smell of gunpowder, and traps. Pups stayed with their pack, with their mother, until they were old enough to survive on their own. Seeing one alone was already nearly impossible, but having one collapse at your feet, staring at you with those amber gold eyes that seemed to carry a question he could not understand. That was beyond anything in his experience. He moved slowly, pulling off his heavy glove and extending his bare hand toward the pup, expecting the animal to snarl or flee or show any of the normal fear responses wild wolves displayed. Instead, the pup whimpered and took one limping step closer, close enough that Marcus could see the extent of the plies. In night, one seen Liebel damage his paws were, destroyed the pads, shredded and bloody, the dew claws torn. One ear had a fresh wound still seeping blood, and his ribs showed through his thick winter coat in a way that spoke of days without food. Marcus pulled his emergency blanket from his blanks and packed the reflective silver material crackling in the cold and moved toward the pup, talking softly in that low, calm voice he had learned to use with frightened animals, the same voice he had once used with Emma when she had nightmares come. "On, little one, let me help you. I do not know what you are doing here, but you cannot survive the night like this." The pup did not growl, did not try to run. He simply stood there, trembling, watching Marcus, with an intensity that felt almost human. When Marcus finally wrapped the blanket around the small body and lifted him, the pup made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a sigh, and Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 18 months. He carried the pup to his machine and wedged him into the cargo box with extra blankets. He pulled out his emergency water bottle and held it to the pup's muzzle. The animal drank frantically, tongue lapping desperately at the liquid. Marcus cleaned the worst of the wounds using his first aid kit designed for humans, but serviceable enough for basic animal care. The pup flinched from the pain, but made no attempt to bite, no attempt to escape, and that was what broke through Marcus's careful numbness. This wild thing, who should be terrified, was trusting him completely. As Marcus worked by headlamp light in the darkness of the Arctic night, he noticed something strange. The pup kept turning his head toward the northwest, toward a specific ridge, visible in the moonlight. He would whine softly, not a sound of pain, but something more urgent, more directed, almost like he was trying to communicate something. Marcus looked where the pup was looking. He saw nothing but snow-covered peaks and the dark shapes of spruce forest in the valley below. But an impossible thought began forming in his mind. What if this pup was not lost? What if he had come here deliberately? What if he had been searching for Marcus specifically? That night, inside his heated wall tent, with the wood stove crackling and the pup wrapped in sleeping bags on a foam pad, Marcus tried to make sense of what was happening. Wolves have territories spanning hundreds of square miles. Packs teach their pups to avoid humans at all costs, to run from the smell of them, to never, ever seek them out. And then Marcus remembered something from exactly 8 days ago. He had stumbled across an illegal snare line, a trapper operating without permits in a protected area. 3 adult wolves had been caught, one already dead, from exposure. The other 2 alive but badly injured. One had been a pregnant female, her leg mangled by the wire snare. Marcus had spent 6 hours cutting them free using his multi-tool and bolt cutters. He always carried for this exact purpose. He had sedated them with the tranquilizer gun he kept for emergencies, treated their wounds as best he could, and stayed with them until they recovered enough to limp away. He had reported the snare line to Fish and Game, but knew the trapper would likely never to be caught. These mountains were too vast, too empty for effective enforcement. But what if something else had been watching from the trees? Wolf packs often send scouts to observe potential threats from a distance. A mother with pups could easily have been observing that scene, watching this human free her packmates, watching him work for hours to save wolves, when most humans in these parts shot them on sight. This pup, by his size and coordination, was around 5 months old, still completely dependent on his mother and pack. He would not survive alone, not in this cold, not with winter coming full force. So if he was here alone, running until his paws bled, it was because his mother could not come to Marcus herself. Marcus looked at the sleeping Bacchus, pup his small chest. Rising and falling with the deep exhaustion of a creature pushed far beyond normal limits, he whispered into the darkness. "Your mother is in trouble, is that it? Did you come to find me because you know I helped before? Is that even possible?" The pup's eyes opened in the dim light of the stove, those amber gold eyes, finding Marcus's face, and there was something there, some kind of knowing that should not exist in a 5-month-old wolf, and Marcus understood with a certainty that defied logic that this was not chance. This was choice. At dawn, Marcus made a decision that his colleagues would have called insane, that violated every protocol of wildlife observation, that could easily end with his death, or at minimum the end of his photography career. He was going to trust a 5-month-old wolf pup to lead him into the wilderness, to find his mother after feeding the pup dried venison from his emergency supplies and checking his wounds. Marcus gently set him down outside the tent and waited the pup. Looked at Marcus, looked at the northwest ridge, started walking his gait uneven from injured paws, but his direction unwavering. He walked 20 feet, stopped, looked back, waiting. Marcus grabbed his rescue pack, the one he kept prepared for. Emergencies loaded with rope climbing gear, emergency flares, GPS beacon, satellite phone, medical supplies, both human and veterinary water and survival gear. He shouldered his rifle not to shoot wolves, but because grizzlies sometimes woke. During mild winters and surprised, bear was more dangerous than any wolf, and he followed. The journey was brutal beyond anything Marcus had experienced in 15 years of Alaska wilderness work. The pup led him through terrain where no snow machine could follow. Climbing, always. Climbing through narrow ravines, choked with ice, crossing frozen streams where one wrong step would plunge him into water cold enough to kill in minutes, scaling rock faces that tore his gloves, even through the reinforced leather Marcus was fit from years of outdoor work. But the combination of altitude, steep terrain, and the physical exhaustion of moving through deep snow in heavy winter gear pushed him to his limits. Within the first 2 hours, his lungs burned in the cold, dry air. His legs trembled with fatigue, and still the pup continued, his small form somehow, finding paths through the impossible landscape. He stopped frequently, not just to rest his injured paws, but to wait for Marcus to catch up to make sure the human was still following at certain points. When Marcus slipped on ice or hesitated before a particularly dangerous drop, the pup would vocalize a sharp bark that clearly meant wait or careful here. Marcus began to understand the patterns. One bark meant come, 2 barks meant danger. Stop. This wild pup, barely out of puppyhood, was teaching Marcus, guiding him, showing him safe paths with a patience and intelligence that seemed impossible for such a young animal. The sun climbed higher, the temperature actually dropping as it rose in the paradoxical way of Arctic winter. Marcus sweated inside his layers. Despite air cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes, his pack felt like it gained 10 pounds every hour. His water bottle started to freeze, and still he followed. Because he had committed to this journey the moment he chose to trust those amber gold eyes, the moment he decided that maybe, just maybe, this impossible thing was real. After 7 hours of climbing, they entered a narrow canyon between 2 massive granite walls. The cliffs rose 300 feet on either side, ancient stone that had stood here for millions of years, creating shadows. Even in the bright midday light, the pup stopped, suddenly his whole body going rigid, and then he howled. It was the first real wolf sound. Marcus had heard him make high-pitched, desperate, carrying all the loneliness and fear and love that a young animal could express, calling for his mother. And from somewhere ahead, deeper in the canyon, came an answer, the howl of an adult wolf. Powerful even in distress, but underneath the power, Marcus could hear weakness, could hear pain. The sound made his throat tighten with a mixture of hope and dread. They had found her, but was she alive? Would she even survive? Whatever had trapped her here. The pup bolted forward now, completely forgetting his injured paws in his desperation. Marcus ran after him, his boots slipping on ice, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he tried to keep up. He scrambled over boulders, following the sounds of the pup's cries and the mother's answering calls. And then he saw it, a clearing about 50 yards wide, and there in the center was the mother wolf. She was magnificent, even in her predicament. Thick silver and gray winter coat, powerful, body built to survive temperatures that would kill most mammals. But she was trapped, caught in an illegal leg snare, the wire cable wrapped around her right rear leg, the other end anchored to a massive boulder, the professional kind of trap that Marcus knew was banned in this area, but still used by poachers who did not care about laws in protected wilderness. The mother had clearly been fighting the snare for days. The ground around her was torn up with struggle, the snow stained with blood from her leg where the cable had cut through fur and skin. Her sides showed ribs, the beginning of starvation setting in. Scattered around her were the remains of a snowshoe hare. She had somehow managed to catch, even trapped, but it had not been enough, not nearly enough. When the wolf's amber eyes met Marcus's, across the clearing, time seemed to stop. Marcus saw everything in that gaze: wild intelligence, predatory instinct, the fear that any trapped animal feels facing a potential threat, but beneath all of that, something that made his heart pound against his ribs: recognition. The wolf knew who Marcus was, knew that the human standing 50 yards away was the same one who had freed her packmates 8 days ago, knew that her pup had somehow found the one human in these vast mountains who might help instead of shoot. And in those amber eyes was a question that transcended the boundary between species. "You came because my son brought you," Will you help me again, or have I gambled everything on a hope that cannot be? Real. The pup was frantic now, running between Marcus and his mother, crying continuously, his small voice breaking with emotion. The mother responded with sounds that tore at Marcus's heart, the language of wolves, the vocabulary of separation and desperate love. She tried to reach toward her pup, stretching as far as the cable would allow, but falling short by 15 feet. The distance between them was impossible. Yet the connection was absolute. Marcus assessed the situation with the cold calculation that years of wilderness survival had taught him. The mother was weak. That was clear. 3 or 4 days without adequate food in temperatures that dropped to -20 at night would be taking a brutal toll, but she was still a 90-pound apex predator, with jaws that could crush bone and instincts that screamed to defend herself from humans. Even injured, a wolf could kill a person if she felt threatened enough. Marcus had seen what wolves could do to moose, to caribou. He had seen the aftermath of the rare wolf attacks on humans. If he approached her wrong, if she decided he was a threat, despite her pup's trust, death could come very quickly. But if he did not help, she would die here slowly, the cable cutting deeper into her leg, infection setting in, starvation taking her down day by day, and her pup would die too, unable to hunt, unable to survive the coming deep winter alone. Marcus made his choice. He unslung his rifle and set it against a rock far from the clearing. He wanted no weapons near him, wanted nothing that might trigger the wolf's fear. He pulled out his bolt cutters, the heavy-duty kind, designed for thick cable, his tranquilizer gun, and the medical kit he kept for wildlife emergencies. The pup watched him with that same intense focus, as if he understood exactly what Marcus was doing and was willing him to succeed. Marcus checked each piece of equipment twice, the bolt cutters tested on a practice piece of cable to make sure they would work in this cold, the tranquilizer gun loaded with a dose calculated for a wolf her size. But he hesitated with the tranquilizer in his hand, because darting her would take away her choice, would take away the trust that had brought them here. If this was going to work, it had to be her decision to allow him close. He put the tranquilizer gun back in his pack and picked up the bolt cutters and a piece of dried venison. He approached slowly, stopping every few feet, talking constantly in that low, calm voice. "I know you are scared. I know. Every instinct says I am dangerous, but your son found me. He brought me here because you trusted that I would help your pack, and I will help you now. I need you to trust me one more time. Please, do not kill me. I am not here to hurt you. I am just trying to give you back to your son." The mother wolf watched his every movement, her body tense, her lips pulled back slightly, showing those impressive fangs, her ears flat against her skull. Every line of her body said threat, danger, human. But she did not lunge, did not try to attack. Even though Marcus was now within range, she watched, and as Marcus got closer, he began tossing small pieces of venison, landing them a few feet from her. At first, she ignored them, her eyes never leaving his face, but hunger was a powerful force. On the third piece, she snatched it from the snow, swallowing without chewing, her golden eyes still locked on Marcus. He tossed 3 more pieces, each one disappearing as fast as it landed, and with each piece, Marcus watched her body language shift subtly. The aggressive edge began to dull. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. Hunger, satisfied, even temporarily changed. The entire equation, she was still wary, still ready to defend herself, but she was reassessing, reconsidering whether this particular human was as dangerous as her instincts screamed. Now came the moment that would determine whether Marcus lived or died. He had to get within biting range, had to kneel next to her trapped leg, had to work the bolt cutters into position while inches from a wild wolf who could end him with one strike if she chose. He moved forward slowly, his hands visible, talking constantly. "Your son is incredible. Do you know that he ran for probably 20 miles to find me? His paws were destroyed. But he did not stop. He knew you needed help, and he knew who to find. That is not just instinct, that is intelligence, that is love, and I am going to get you back to him. I promise." Marcus knelt in the snow, 3 feet from the wolf, close enough to Smell her musk, wild and sharp and real, close enough to hear her breathing. See the rapid pulse in her throat. Count the individual guard hairs in her thick coat. The mother's eyes followed his every movement, her muscles coiled tight, trembling with the effort of restraining instinct that screamed, attack, defend, survive, but she held still, and Marcus understood in that moment that this was not just an animal acting on conditioning or training. This was a conscious choice. This wolf understood on some level deeper than language that Marcus was trying to help. That the human who had freed her packmates before would free her again, and she was choosing to trust, even though evolution and experience taught her that humans meant death. Cable had cut deep into her leg. The wound was infected, swollen and oozing. Marcus could see bone in one spot, and his stomach turned, but he forced himself to focus. He positioned the bolt cutters on the cable about 6 inches from her leg, where he could cut without risking further injury. The cable was thick, heavy gauge, designed to hold animals much larger than wolves. He squeezed the handles, the cutters bit into the cable, the metal resisting. The wolf flinched at the movement, her ears going even flatter. But she did not pull away. Marcus squeezed harder, his hands aching from the cold and the pressure the cable cut halfway through. He repositioned, squeezed again with everything he had, his muscles burning, his hands going numb, and then with a sound like a gunshot, the cable snapped. The mother wolf jerked back the sudden freedom after days of being held, sending her stumbling. She caught herself, her injured leg barely holding weight, but she was free. The pup rushed forward, slamming into his mother with enough force to knock her sideways, and the sound she made then was one Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. It was not a howl or a growl. It was something far more primal and pure. It was recognition. It was relief. It was love given voice by a creature who had thought she might never see her pup again. She pulled him close with one massive paw, curling her body around him, and began grooming him with desperate intensity, her rough tongue passing over his face, his ears, his small body. She was confirming, through taste and scent and touch, that he was real, that he was whole, that this was not some fever dream born of starvation and pain. The pup made sounds Marcus had never heard from wolves before, high-pitched, keening vocalizations that spoke of 3 days of terror, 3 days of running on bleeding paws to find help, 3 days of hoping that the strange human would follow him. Here he burrowed into his mother's fur, his body shaking, his eyes squeezed shut. He was home. He was safe. His mother was free and alive, and holding him, and nothing else in the entire world mattered. Marcus backed away slowly, giving them space, giving them the privacy that this moment deserved. He walked on legs that felt like water back to where he had dropped his pack and sank down in the snow, his whole body shaking now with adrenaline crash and exhaustion and emotion he had not let himself feel in 18 months. He looked at his hands. They were bleeding from rope, burn and cold. His fingers were probably frostbitten. He had not even noticed when it happened during the approach, had not felt anything except the desperate need to free her, to reunite this family, to do one thing right after failing Emma so completely. And the tears came then, tears that froze on his cheeks almost instantly in the Arctic air, tears of exhaustion and relief and grief, and something larger than he had words, for he had not just saved a wolf today, he had witnessed something that should not be possible, a wild animal choosing trust over fear, choosing to believe that one human in a species that had hunted her kind for thousands of years could be safe. And her pup, an animal barely out of infancy, running 20 miles through brutal terrain to find help from that one specific human. Because he had watched Marcus free wolves before and remembered and understood that this human was different, Marcus pulled himself together, eventually his photographer's instinct kicking in. Even through exhaustion, he retrieved dried meat from his pack and placed it on a flat rock about 40 feet from where the wolves rested. He added packets of high-calorie survival food and a water bottle. Then he moved to a spot 60 feet away and began setting up his emergency shelter. He would not leave them, not yet. The mother's leg was badly infected. She needed time to recover before she could hunt, before she could care for her pup properly. He would stay and watch from a distance, make sure they had food and water until he was certain she had regained enough strength. As Marcus worked, setting up his tent, staking it down in the frozen ground, he felt the weight of the wolf's gaze on him. When he turned, the mother was watching him, the pup pressed against her side, but her amber eyes were fixed on Marcus. Across the distance their eyes met, and Marcus saw something in that gaze that made his chest ache. It was not gratitude. Exactly. Wolves did not think in human terms of debt or owing, but it was acknowledgement. It was recognition. Perhaps even a kind of respect between two parents who had both fought desperately to protect what mattered most. Marcus nodded slowly, knowing she probably did not understand human gestures, but feeling like it was necessary. Anyway, the mother's ears flicked forward. Then she returned her attention to her pup, curling her body around him in a promise that they would never be separated again. Marcus finished setting up camp, his hands still shaking his mind, still trying to process what he had just experienced, what he had survived. And as darkness fell over the canyon and the temperature dropped toward -30, he sat by his small camp stove and watched the two wolves curled together 50 yards away. And for the first time since Emma died, he felt something other than emptiness. Over the next 4 days, Marcus witnessed something few humans ever see: the intimate life of a wolf family recovering together. The mother's leg began to heal slowly with the combination of rest and the antibiotics Marcus had carefully mixed into her food. She started moving more easily, putting weight on the injured leg, teaching her pup the skills he would need to survive. She showed him how to dig for voles in the snow, how to position his body for the strike, how to conserve energy. While hunting, she was patient when he failed, enthusiastic when he succeeded, touching her nose to his head in approval, when he finally caught a small rodent on his own. On the 3rd day, she made her first real hunt since being freed. Marcus watched through his telephoto lens as she stalked a young caribou that had wandered into the canyon. The hunt was beautiful, brutal, efficient. 30 minutes of patience followed by an explosive chase and a clean kill. She called her pup with a specific vocalization, and they fed together that evening. As Marcus sat by his camp stove, the mother wolf did something that stopped his heart. She approached his camp, not close. She stopped at about 30 feet, but close enough that it was clearly intentional, clearly required. Overriding every instinct that screamed to avoid humans, the pup was at her side, pressed against her in the way young wolves draw courage from their parents. The two wolves sat in the snow and looked at Marcus, 3 sets of eyes meeting in the fading light, amber eyes, ancient and wild ice, gold eyes, young and trusting brown, eyes filled with something Marcus could not name. The moment stretched, the wind died, the world held its breath, and then the mother made a sound, not a growl or a warning, but something softer. A chuff, the sound wolves make to communicate with family members. With those they accept. Marcus had read about it in research papers, but never imagined hearing it directed at him. The sound bypassed his logical mind and went straight to something deeper, some primitive understanding that needed no translation. The wolf was saying something, maybe thank you, maybe goodbye, maybe simply I see you and I acknowledge what you have done for us. Marcus found himself making the sound back, his human voice, a poor imitation, but carrying the right intention. I see you too. I am honored. You chose to trust me. I will never forget this. The wolf's ears came forward, then she turned with fluid grace and walked away, her pup following. But before they disappeared into the shadows, the pup looked back, once a glance that carried weight, that said, I remember you. I will always remember. The next morning, when Marcus emerged from his tent at dawn, the wolves were gone. Their tracks led north toward the high country where the caribou herds would be migrating toward terrain too remote and dangerous for humans to follow. Marcus stood looking at those prints for a long time, tracing their path with his eyes until they vanished into the vast white wilderness. He felt a mixture of sadness and completion that sat heavy in his chest. He had helped. He had been chosen by a wild pup, and he had answered that choice with everything he had, and now it was over. Now these wild creatures would but return to being what were always meant to be, ghosts in the mountains, seen by human eyes, so rarely that each encounter became legend. Marcus packed up his camp methodically, his hands clumsy with exhaustion and cold. The hike back to his snow machine took 2 days, pushing through deep snow in temperatures that hovered around -25. His body was destroyed, his fingers were frostbitten, his legs could barely carry him by the time he reached his base camp. But none of it mattered compared to what he had experienced. He would carry scars from this, physical and emotional, and he would treasure everyone. When he finally made it back to his cabin near the town of Wiseman, he slept for 14 hours straight. When he woke, he processed his photos, backing everything up multiple times, wrote long entries in his field journal, trying to capture what cameras could not, the feelings, the fears, the moments of terror and joy. But even as he documented everything, he knew these images would stay private. This was not content for publication. This was sacred. 3 months passed. Marcus threw himself into work, photographing other species, documenting the late winter caribou migration, meeting with conservation groups about wolf protection. But part of his mind was always on that canyon, wondering if the mother and pup were alive, if they had found their pack, if they were thriving in the brutal Alaska winter. And then in late February, on a morning when aurora danced green and purple across the sky, Marcus made a decision. He told himself it was for new photographs, for a project on wolf recovery patterns. He told himself many logical, professional reasons, but he believed none of them. He was going back because he needed to know, because something in him hoped that maybe, just maybe, he had not been completely forgotten. He hiked back into that canyon 3 months to the day after he had left it. The journey took him 2 days, the landscape transformed by deeper snow, by the absolute silence of deep winter. When he reached the clearing where he had freed the mother wolf, he set up camp in the exact same spot, and he waited that night. He built a small fire, more for the comfort of light than for warmth. And as he sat watching the flames dance, he thought about Emma, about how grief had consumed him, about how a 5-month-old wolf pup had somehow reached across the impossible distance between species and shown him that connection was still possible, that trust could exist in the most unlikely places, that love in all its forms was worth the risk. The next morning Marcus woke before dawn, as always, and when he unzipped his tent and stepped out into air so cold it hurt to breathe, he saw them tracks in the fresh snow that had fallen during the night, less than 20 feet from his tent. Large prints and smaller prints, though the smaller ones were not so small anymore. The pup was growing tracks, circling his camp, investigating, and then Marcus saw what sat on the flat rock where he had left food 3 months ago. A snowshoe hare freshly killed the body, still warm enough that steam rose from it in the frigid morning air. The kill was fresh made within the last hour, and it had been placed, not dropped or hidden or consumed, but placed carefully on the one surface Marcus would definitely notice. The message was unmistakable. This was reciprocity. This was gift-giving. This was thank you spoken in the only language a wolf knew. Marcus sank down in the snow, his eyes burning with tears that froze almost instantly on his face. He looked around at the canyon walls, at the spruce forest, knowing they were watching, but seeing nothing. Wolves were ghosts, for good reason. They could be 30 feet away, and invisible, their grey winter coats, perfect camouflage against rock and snow. But Marcus did not need to see them to know they were there. He could feel their presence, could sense those amber eyes, observing from some hidden vantage point. He spoke out loud, his voice carrying across the silent valley. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for this gift. I hope you are both strong and safe. I hope you know that meeting you changed everything. For me, showed me that connection is still possible, even for broken things like me. And that maybe, just maybe, I can forgive myself for looking away for those 30 seconds, because I showed up when it mattered for you. He did not know if they could hear him, Probably they were too far away, but the intention would carry on some level deeper than words. Marcus spent more days in that canyon, photographing the landscape, seeing no sign of the wolves beyond tracks that appeared each morning, circling his camp. On the third day, when he returned from a hike, he found that the hare was gone, and in its place in the snow was a mark that made his breath catch. It was not deliberate art, he knew that logically. It was probably just the result of the wolves investigating the area, paws and muzzles snuffling through snow as they checked his scent. But the pattern looked remarkably like a wolf print, pressed deep as if in signature, as if saying, "We were here, we remember you, we will always remember." Marcus photographed it from every angle before the wind could erase it, and then he broke camp and began the long hike back to civilization. 5 months later, in July, when the tundra exploded with wildflowers and the sun never set, Marcus returned to the canyon one more time. And there, on a ridge overlooking the valley, he saw them, the mother wolf, strong and healthy, leading a hunt, teaching her now nearly grown son the advanced skills of pack hunting. And for just a moment, the mother stopped and looked back across the distance, too far for details, too far to be certain. But Marcus knew he knew with the same certainty he had felt. When the pup first collapsed at his feet, the wolf stood there, watching the human who had freed her, who had trusted her son, who had chosen to help when he could have walked away. Then she turned and vanished into her wild kingdom, back to the realm of ghosts and legends where she belonged. Marcus drove away, his heart full in a way it had not been since before Emma died, knowing that some gifts cannot be measured or explained, some connections transcend every boundary and become something that looks from certain angles like grace, like redemption, like proof that we are never truly alone in this world, that sometimes the broken find each other for a reason, and that somewhere in the vast Alaskan wilderness 2 wolves carried the memory of a human who showed up when it mattered, who chose trust over fear, and perhaps in their own way, they were grateful, just as Marcus would be grateful for all his remaining days, that he was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, to hear the cries of a pup who knew where to find hope, when hope was the last thing either of them had left.